What follows is not a fairy tale, and it is not presented as established fact. It is an account of claims, allegations, and reported intelligence assessments that have circulated for years behind closed doors, and which, according to sources, have now resurfaced in dramatic fashion. On January 16, 2026, inside Clarence House, an extraordinary closed-door briefing allegedly took place. For a royal family defined by its devotion to silence, this moment marked a sharp departure. Princess and, long regarded as the most disciplined and least theatrical of Queen Elizabeth II's children, was said to have confirmed the existence of a long-rumored intelligence file often referred to in diplomatic circles as the Saudi Dossier. According to those present, the message was stark. The file exists, warnings were issued, and they were ignored. If you are just encountering this story now, pause here and subscribe or follow so you don't miss the next developments, because this narrative only grows more complex from this point forward. The alleged dossier, said to have been compiled by British intelligence in late 2016, reportedly emerged during routine Level 3 vetting, standard procedure for romantic partners of senior royals. Meghan Markle, then an American actress best known for a supporting television role, was not expected to trigger concern. Yet, according to multiple sources who claim familiarity with the file, she did. The issue, insiders say, was not race, class, or celebrity. It was inconsistency. Publicly, Markle's narrative between 2008 and 2015 was that of a struggling performer navigating auditions, modest income, and career uncertainty. Privately, according to alleged intelligence summaries, she appeared repeatedly in environments that did not align with that profile: luxury yachts, elite Mediterranean resorts, invitation-only events tied to Gulf financiers, and high-security social functions with no visible means of funding. Sources claim the dossier did not accuse her of espionage or criminal wrongdoing. Instead, it reportedly applied a specific analytical label used in counterintelligence risk modeling: strategic social placement, a term used to describe individuals believed to be socially advanced into powerful networks by third-party patrons for long-term influence or access. At this stage, share this analysis if you believe questions of power, influence, and transparency still matter in 2026. According to alleged annexes, investigators flagged repeated appearances on superyachts between 2009 and 2012, luxury hotel stays during peak seasons in Monaco and Sardinia, and attendance at high-level cultural and diplomatic gatherings in Europe and the Middle East. The reported cost of such activity, travel, accommodation, security, and access, was said to far exceed her declared income at the time. One unnamed former intelligence analyst is quoted in the material as saying the concern was mathematical, not moral. The numbers did not reconcile. Princess Anne is said to have reviewed the file in early 2017 and confronted Prince Harry directly, posing a question sources describe as devastating in its simplicity: who financed this lifestyle? According to accounts, Harry refused to engage with the material in depth, dismissing it as intrusive and prejudicial. Palace leadership, wary of repeating historical mistakes and facing mounting public pressure to modernize, reportedly chose silence over confrontation. If this sounds familiar, comment below, because silence has been a recurring character in this entire saga. Another figure repeatedly cited in the alleged dossier is Marcus Anderson, a senior Soho House executive. Intelligence summaries reportedly describe him not as a villain, but as a facilitator, someone whose professional role involved granting access, shaping introductions, and curating proximity between ambition and power. Analysts allegedly viewed him as a consistent presence at the intersection of celebrity culture and elite diplomacy. The most controversial claim within the narrative involves a pair of diamond earrings worn by Meghan Markle during a 2018 state event. While publicly described at the time as borrowed jewelry, later reporting and alleged intelligence reviews suggest they were a gift, possibly linked to a Saudi intermediary. These claims remain disputed, unproven in court, and strongly denied by Sussex allies, but they continue to fuel debate because of timing, value, and diplomatic sensitivity. If you want a full breakdown of the jewelry controversy and why it became a flashpoint inside the palace, stay tuned for the next section. What matters most is not whether every allegation holds up, but what this episode reveals about institutions under strain. According to this account, the royal household buried the file, restricted access to a handful of senior figures, and hoped time would erase the risk. It did not. By 2026, leaked photographs, renewed financial questions, and internal fractures allegedly forced the issue back into the open. Princess Anne's reported remarks at Clarence House, measured, unsentimental, and final, signaled not gossip, but reckoning. To supporters of the Sussexes, this narrative represents character assassination dressed up as intelligence. To critics, it confirms long-held suspicions about influence, access, and narrative construction. To the monarchy, it is yet another reminder that silence can delay consequences, but it cannot eliminate them. If you believe this story deserves continued scrutiny, like, share, and follow, because the unanswered questions are now louder than the denials. And the most unsettling question remains unresolved. Was this simply a modern love story misunderstood by an outdated institution, or a case study in how power quietly moves people into position long before the public ever notices? The next chapter will decide which interpretation survives. What followed the Clarence House briefing was not immediate confirmation, but something far more destabilizing for the institution: controlled leakage. According to multiple media analysts and former palace correspondents, within 48 hours of Princess Anne's reported remarks, selective fragments of the long-sealed intelligence material began circulating among senior journalists, legal consultants, and parliamentary security advisors. Not the dossier itself, never the full document, but references to it. Mentions. Echoes. Enough to make deniability increasingly fragile. If you want to understand how power actually communicates when it cannot speak openly, follow this series closely, because this is where the story shifts from rumor to mechanism. According to sources familiar with the matter, the palace did not move to refute the existence of the dossier. Instead, officials allegedly adopted a posture known internally as strategic non-correction, neither confirming nor denying specifics, while allowing the impression of substance to linger. This alone marked a significant departure from past crisis management, where aggressive rebuttal was often the preferred response. Privately, aides were said to be divided into two camps. One group argued that revisiting the Sussex years risked reopening wounds the monarchy could no longer afford. The other believed that silence had already failed, and that continued avoidance would only deepen public mistrust if further disclosures emerged without institutional context. If you've noticed how narratives change when silence breaks down, share this analysis, because this divide explains much of what followed. Attention soon turned to process, not personality. Constitutional scholars began asking how a dossier of this sensitivity, if it existed as described, could be compiled, reviewed, and then effectively sidelined. Former intelligence officials speaking hypothetically noted that Level 3 vetting is not discretionary, it is procedural. Once anomalies are flagged, they are logged, escalated, and archived. They do not vanish. They wait. The implication was chilling for the palace. If the file remained intact, then its reappearance was never a question of if, but when. Meanwhile, Prince Harry's position, already precarious, was described by royal watchers as increasingly isolated. According to people claiming insight into his current state, he was not engaging with the renewed scrutiny publicly or privately. Friends reportedly described him as exhausted by what they framed as a relentless reinterpretation of his past decisions through a national security lens rather than a personal one. Whether that interpretation is fair remains hotly contested. But the reframing itself is what matters. If you want the next section unpacking Harry's role through the lens of institutional risk rather than tabloid psychology, stay subscribed. As for Meghan Markle, allies dismissed the entire narrative as recycled innuendo weaponized through anonymous sourcing. They emphasized that no criminal charges, intelligence sanctions, or formal findings were ever produced, and that association with wealthy individuals does not constitute wrongdoing. Supporters also pointed out the historical pattern of powerful institutions retroactively justifying discomfort by pathologizing women who disrupt established hierarchies. Critics countered that this framing avoids the core issue, not morality, but undisclosed sponsorship and access. This is where the concept at the heart of the alleged dossier, strategic social placement, became the flashpoint. Intelligence experts cautioned that SSP is not an accusation. It is a risk model. It does not allege intent, only structural positioning. In other words, an individual need not know they are being advanced for the classification to apply. That distinction, subtle but crucial, is why the story refuses to die. If this nuance matters to you, leave a comment, because it is almost always lost in headline-driven coverage. The international dimension added further pressure. Diplomatic observers noted that Gulf-UK relations in the late 2010s were defined by soft power exchange, culture, philanthropy, entertainment, and elite social access functioning as unofficial diplomatic channels. Within that ecosystem, blurred lines were not aberrations, they were features. This context complicates any attempt to reduce the narrative to heroes and villains. By early February 2026, speculation intensified around whether Parliament's Intelligence and Security Committee might request a classified briefing, not to investigate individuals, but to assess whether existing vetting protocols for royal relationships remain adequate in an era of globalized influence. Even the possibility of such a review signaled how far the conversation had moved from celebrity gossip to statecraft. If a parliamentary inquiry is announced, you'll want to be here first, because it would mark an unprecedented moment in modern royal history. What remains unresolved is motive, on all sides. Why resurface now? Why allow partial confirmation without full disclosure? Why speak after nearly a decade of silence? Some analysts believe Princess Anne's reported intervention was not about Meghan Markle at all, but about legacy. A final attempt to document that warnings were issued, processes were followed, and responsibility did not rest solely with those who raised concerns. In institutions built on continuity, being able to say we warned them carries enormous weight. The monarchy now faces a dilemma with no clean resolution. Full transparency risks validating years of speculation. Continued silence risks confirming it. And somewhere between those extremes sits a public increasingly skeptical of curated narratives, whether royal or revolutionary. If this story tells us anything, it is that modern power rarely collapses in scandal. It erodes through unanswered questions. And the most dangerous question of all is no longer about infiltration, romance, or intention, but about accountability. When institutions choose silence over scrutiny, who ultimately pays the price? The next continuation will examine what happens if the file is never released, and why, in some cases, absence can be more powerful than proof. As the alleged Dossier narrative continued to ripple outward, analysts began situating it within a broader pattern that extended well beyond intelligence files or palace briefings. The controversy, they argued, could not be understood in isolation. It intersected with celebrity culture, media economics, philanthropy branding, and the evolving role of monarchy itself in the 21st century. To understand why this story refuses to fade, follow closely, because the context matters as much as the claims. Long before her relationship with Prince Harry, Meghan Markle had cultivated a public identity that blended ambition, activism, and aspirational lifestyle. Her now-defunct lifestyle platform, The TIG, regularly featured luxury travel, high-end fashion, wellness retreats, and global cuisine, content that critics later cited as evidence of early access to elite environments, while supporters framed it as savvy brand building in the influencer age. What is often overlooked is that the TIG emerged during a period when celebrity culture itself was undergoing transformation. Social capital became currency. Visibility became leverage. And proximity to power, political, cultural, or financial, was increasingly normalized as networking rather than privilege. If this framing changes how you see the story, share this thread, because it complicates easy conclusions. Prince Harry, for his part, was already a symbol of institutional tension long before Meghan entered his life. His military service, public struggles with grief, and vocal criticism of the press had positioned him as both asset and liability to the monarchy. Palace historians note that Harry represented a generational shift, a royal less inclined toward stoicism and more aligned with therapeutic openness and moral absolutism. That context matters because it shaped how warnings, if they occurred, were received. According to several royal biographers, Harry had grown distrustful of palace systems, viewing them as cold, archaic, and complicit in past harms, particularly in the treatment of his mother, Princess Diana. If you want the next section breaking down the Diana parallel and why it still governs palace decision-making, stay tuned. Meghan and Harry's early public popularity further complicated internal resistance. Their wedding in 2018 was framed globally as a symbol of modernization, biracial representation, American dynamism, and a softer royal image aligned with global humanitarian language. For a monarchy navigating Brexit-era uncertainty, this was not trivial, it was strategic value. This is where some analysts argue the institution itself became conflicted. Even if concerns existed privately, confronting them risked undermining a narrative the palace had already endorsed publicly. In institutional terms, momentum can override caution. If you've seen organizations double down instead of course correct, comment below, because this pattern is not unique to royalty. Following the Sussexes' departure from official duties, their post-royal trajectory added another layer. Multi-million-dollar media deals with streaming platforms, high-profile interviews, and tightly controlled storytelling reignited debates about authenticity versus monetization. Supporters argued the couple was reclaiming agency. Critics countered that the emphasis on grievance conflicted with claims of seeking privacy. Within this environment, renewed scrutiny of Meghan's pre-royal life took on amplified significance. Allegations that might once have remained fringe found new oxygen in a polarized media ecosystem primed for confirmation bias on all sides. Importantly, none of this required an intelligence dossier to function. The culture itself did the work. If you're still reading, follow now, because this convergence explains why resurfaced claims feel more volatile in 2026 than they did a decade earlier. Princess Anne's reported role, meanwhile, was interpreted by observers less as personal criticism and more as institutional accounting. Known throughout her life for rejecting celebrity excess, and has consistently distanced herself from media spectacle, philanthropy branding, and curated vulnerability. Her credibility, in this narrative, stems not from warmth but from consistency. Those familiar with her public record note that she has previously clashed with palace PR strategies she viewed as performative. From that perspective, her alleged decision to speak, if accurately reported, may reflect frustration not with individuals, but with what she saw as narrative distortion overtaking risk assessment. This interpretation does not require belief in every allegation to be persuasive. Meanwhile, Marcus Anderson's public silence became a story in itself. In celebrity ecosystems, silence is often read as strategy rather than absence. Anderson's long-standing role within Soho House, a network that has included politicians, tech executives, artists, and royals, placed him at the center of debates about soft power and cultural diplomacy, even as he maintained a low public profile. No wrongdoing has been proven. No formal accusations have been made. Yet influence does not require illegality to matter. If this distinction resonates, save this analysis, because it is key to understanding modern elite networks. Internationally, the story intersected with broader scrutiny of Gulf soft power efforts in Western institutions. From sports ownership to art sponsorships to university endowments, the use of cultural access as geopolitical leverage is now widely documented. Analysts argue that the alleged dossier fits into this pattern, not as an outlier, but as a case study. That does not make any individual culpable. It does, however, raise uncomfortable questions about vetting, disclosure, and transparency at the highest levels of public life. By mid-2026, public opinion remained deeply split. Polling suggested that belief in the narrative correlated less with evidence and more with prior attitudes toward the monarchy, celebrity activism, and institutional authority. In other words, people were not evaluating facts, they were defending identities. This polarization may be the story's most enduring consequence. If you want the next continuation examining how this controversy reshapes trust in institutions beyond the royal family, media, intelligence, philanthropy, make sure you're following, because the implications extend far beyond Windsor. Ultimately, the alleged dossier functions less as a document than as a symbol. To critics, it represents buried truth. To supporters, weaponized insinuation. To the monarchy, a reminder that silence, once protective, can become corrosive in an age of leaks and narratives without gatekeepers. The unresolved tension is not about whether love was real or influence was present. It is about whether modern power structures can adapt to radical transparency without imploding. And the question now facing every institution watching this unfold is unsettlingly simple. When the story can no longer be controlled, who controls the damage? The next section will explore what happens when narratives outlive evidence, and why, in the digital age, perception may be the most permanent legacy of all.